back to YCR's Food for Thought series. For those who are just seeing YCR for the first time, we're an advocacy group made by students and young professionals for students and young professionals. And we believe that Canada can have a strong future in resources, the economy, and the environment. Please connect with us on Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn at YC Resources if you want to learn more about what we do. So today we have a very special Food for Thought planned. We have some of our very own YCR members here to share their thoughts on some of the pressing questions facing young Canadians today. Each panelist have their own interests, passions, and reasons for advocating for Canada's natural resources. Our goal for today is to share some stories, opinions, and perspectives of different kinds surrounding our natural resources and why each perspective is so important and necessary. So before I introduce them, let me first introduce myself. I'm Justus. I'm a graduate of the University of Alberta. I studied finance and minored in economics, and I have been with YCR for about a year and 6 months now. So I've been anticipating a panel like this for quite some time, and because each panelist has their own unique experiences and stories like every Canadian, I want to let each of them introduce themselves. But before I do that, let me just say that attendees are welcome to ask questions in the Q&A box, and we'll address them at the end if we have time. So I guess we'll start with Gaby and then go around the horn. Gaby, can you tell us a bit about yourself, your background, and what got you interested in the natural resources discussions we have at YCR?
Yes, definitely. Thanks for the intro, Justus. So my name is Gaby. I'm a graduate from Dalhousie University in Halifax, Nova Scotia, and I graduated last May with a degree in chemical engineering. And now I work full-time in the oil and gas industry in Calgary, Alberta for Whitecap Resources. And I first learned about YCR a couple of summers ago when I was a summer student at Whitecap. It's actually where YCR started. It was a group of summer students that came up with the idea that we really wanted to get students and young professionals, we wanted to get their voice out in the public. So that's sort of how the group came together. And coming from a place where I knew absolutely 0% about the industry, I had no knowledge, like no opinion on it at all. I really loved how passionate and how important people made the industry seem when I came here. So that's really what encouraged me to join YCR, is that people were so passionate, they were so knowledgeable on the subject and their expertise in natural resources. And so far, I've learned that personal stories are definitely the most effective way to communicate how important the industry is, because it's those personal stories that stick with each other. So that's why I think these conversations are so important, is to get a face to the experience so you can sort of see how the industry impacts people in their everyday lives. So thanks.
Awesome. Thank you, Gaby. Sohaib, if you want to go next.
For me, I didn't know much about the sector prior to 2020. All I'd known is that life was good when oil is up, and life in the city, Calgary, is miserable when it's down. And for the past many years, it's been tough. 2017, 2018, 2019 has been tough. I had ran a business and things were going really well. And then when prices started, going south, I've seen that business. So I've always had an emotional reason as to why protecting resource extraction or promoting that within the area that you reside in is always a good idea, but never really a logical, concise one. So I remember at that time, especially during the differential blowout of 2018, when we were in the slumps, and some people, or there was a lot of noise about, okay, well, this is a great time to start that transition, and Alberta needs to move away from the resource. And I'm thinking to myself, there's just a lot of pain here, and then there's a lot of rejoicing that's going on, and that always had that emotional impact on me. But I didn't really have the time to look into it a lot more until 2020 came around. And as a byproduct of being all in collective quarantine, there was a lot of time to look into it. And when I started looking into it, a case for investing in our sector presented itself. And as a byproduct of that, I spent quite a bit of time being online and being vocal, trying to create conversations, social media. So I came across YCR through Cody on LinkedIn, and he connected me with Hunter, And then later I got a chance to meet Brock and a couple of the other guys. But I met through Hunter. Hunter talked to me about, SFC, now YCR, and I thought it was great, a chance to meet other like-minded individuals and really speak about something that holds such a significant topic in our lives. And the reason I say this is because when things were bad in 2018, a lot of young Canadians were considering leaving the province and have left just because of how tough it was. And now we're fortunate to be in significantly better circumstances. We've had about 36,000 new migrations, people come into Alberta, predominantly as to how well this province is currently doing. But that's pretty much what highlighted the impact for me that resource extraction has, and what drew me to it and has drawn my involvement to YCR and trying to be as involved as I possibly can. And the fact that you guys host such great events is just a cherry on top.
Awesome. Thanks, Sohaib. So Myles, if you want to give a quick introduction for yourself as well.
Yeah, I guess I'll be a little bit brief with it. So my name is Myles. I'm a fourth-year political science major at the University of Calgary. So I'm a born and raised Calgarian. And I guess with that, I always grew up around the resource sector, where my parents worked in natural resources. Everyone who I know, their parents worked in natural resources. And I kind of grew up with conflicting messages, I guess, because you hear at school, okay, we need to get off oil and gas because it's climate change, it's destroying our planet, yada, yada, yada. And then I go home and then my parents tell me, no, oil and gas is saving the planet. We need natural resources. So growing up, like I didn't think about it as much, but I was definitely a little bit more conflicted with it. And then I got involved with YCR about a year and a half ago. And I think what YCR does so great is it allows us to have those conversations. And I think being that Canada is a resource superpower, I think that we have a responsibility to have those conversations so that we can continue to lead the world, but also lead the world in an ethical manner.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Myles. So on that subject, I guess it leads right into our first question. I'll start off with you, Myles, but then, anyone is welcome to raise their hand and give their thoughts on the discussion. But speaking of worldwide and natural resources and those issues, the world is a lot more unstable politically and economically than it was 10 years ago. So the war in Ukraine, Taiwan, Hong Kong, just a few examples. As a young person, how does that influence your priorities when you're talking about energy or where our natural resources come from? So we'll start here with Myles.
So I think more than anything, compared to 10 years ago, the world is more decentralized than it was. So I think all of us here in this call grew up in a world of globalization, where you could get anything from any part of the world in basically an instant, and it was really great. But then, around 2016, we started to realize that globalization screwed a lot of people over, and it didn't work out for a lot of people. So the best examples of that are the election of Trump, Brexit. And we saw that, okay, globalization maybe wasn't the best thing for everyone. And then, a couple of years ago happens, right? So COVID-19, and we see countries, it's not that we're not willing to help each other out, but it's that we'll prioritize our own interests first, right? So in COVID, when Canada needs materials from the US for masks or vaccines, the US will say, okay, you can have our extras, but we're going to prioritize our own citizens first. The Ukraine happened, Russia invades Ukraine, and it's like, okay, well, we want to stop Russia from invading Ukraine, but we're not willing to risk our own citizens' lives to do that. So I think more than anything, the world that we're going into, where it is more decentralized, what that means for natural resources is that we need stable supplies in them. And if we can't rely on other countries in the world, we have to rely on ourselves. And that as much as we should continue to be pushing ourselves as a leader, we need to look out for our own interests first. Awesome.
And yeah, it's very true. I mean, things are a lot different than they used to be even 5 years ago. It seems as though a lot of fear grips people pretty quickly when it comes to those situations, especially worldwide. So My next question goes across to Sohaib. So, Sohaib, as a young person growing up in Canada, why is energy affordability something we need to worry about as maybe a global citizen? Relating back to the last question, what's your biggest concern in relation to energy affordability as we move forward?
The biggest thing that we're figuring out, young Canadians and Canadians in general are figuring out right now is when you have lower cost of energy, you're able to do more things because less of your capital is being directed towards, getting around, keeping yourself warm and so forth. And energy is one of those things that when it increases, you will see it in everything. You'll see an increase in food. You'll see it an increase in the materials you purchase. It will flow through a lot of different things. So in order to be able to maximize your quality of life, you need cheap energy in order to get that done. So it's very synonymous with a great quality of life. So if you look at countries that have high cost of energy, they typically end up having a lower quality of life. So there was a report that came out that talked about how there's families in third world families they use less energy consumption of an American fridge, of a typical American fridge. So you can imagine the disparate quality of life between the energy rich and the energy poor. And when we run into these things where the energy rich try to stipulate on the energy poor how to live their lives and what type of energy they should use, that is something that we got to be a constant reminder to ourselves of how lucky and how grateful we are to be in this position. So we can help out maybe the energy poor nations by being able to find ways to transition. Maybe if coal is an issue, we can focus on natural gas, cleaner alternatives, rather than just applying a broad stroke and limiting energy as a whole. So ultimately, to answer the fundamental question, the reason young Canadians should care about the cost of energy is because it has a direct correlation with their quality of life, which is what we've been figuring out right now the past couple of months during this high period of high energy prices, which looks like it may be set to go even higher if we get a uncomfortably cold winter.
Yeah, a great response. And it's so true that, we haven't even seen the worst yet. And already you can see the drawbacks of not, prioritizing that energy affordability, right? And, it just gets worse and worse the more you put it off to the side, the more you decide not to prioritize it, because it truly is what makes the world go round, really is what energy is at the end of the day. So my next question kind of leads towards Gaby. And I just wanted to ask, maybe in relation to this energy affordability question, how have your views changed on natural resources since you were younger, growing up in a different part of Canada where maybe those questions aren't asked as often?
Yeah, that is definitely true, because I went to high school in Nova Scotia, and to be honest, we were never taught anything about natural resources, and I was never exposed to a single thing. So just let you guys know, we were never taught in high school that like natural resources were bad. We were just not told anything, which in my opinion is it's not worse, but it's also, we were definitely not aware. And it wasn't until university where I actually started seeing those conflicting views with people that were more pro and more con. And my views didn't really even begin to grow or change until I did my first co-op in the industry, because that's when my knowledge on the subject began to grow. Because before, I literally did not know a single thing. I did not know that wells were drilled down and then horizontally. I did not know that. I thought they were just drilled down. I didn't know that. I thought I could fit into a well bore. I thought I could like jump into a hole, but it is not that big. It is way smaller than that. Like there's just so much that I didn't know. So it really opened my mind when I started working in the industry. And I started learning things like the fact that we have been doing, or I work for Whitecap Resources. So like Whitecap in particular has been doing carbon sequestration, for example, for longer than I've even been born. So our Joffrey unit in Alberta has been sequestering since 1984, I think it is. And our Weyburn unit has been doing that since 2000. So these are not like, they're of course new and innovative technologies, but this is something that the industry has been doing for decades. And this is something that they're experts on. And this is something that I did not know at all. Another thing that I learned was the fact that in recent years, gas flaring volumes globally have increased, but as a country, Canada has decreased our flaring volumes. So I didn't realize that Canada is actually ahead of the game when it comes to these environmental regulations on a global scale, and other countries should be following our lead based on our performance and what we've done. So my view, when it was nothing, it now has become really positive, and I'm really, really proud to say that I work for the oil and gas industry because we've been doing all these things. And our industry really is, we are experts on carbon capture and we are experts on environmental sustainability. Like, this is something that they've been doing for years. And yeah, I'm really proud to work in the industry to continue to develop those ideas and just continue to grow my view on the industry as well.
Awesome. Yeah, and it's interesting, weird to see, and it's kind of sad to see the huge difference, even just province to province in Canada when it comes to energy literacy, natural resource literacy. It's interesting to see that effect where if you don't grow up around natural resources, it's not something you prioritize. So that sort of leads into my next question, sort of directed at Myles, but I also have a follow-up question towards Gaby, and Sohaib, you can jump in as well. So Myles, what effect does this regionalism that we have in Canada, so the different provinces with sort of these very large knowledge gaps, what effect does it have on Canadians regarding natural resources, and how do you think we fix that? How do you combat that?
So regionalism, it's a strange idea, I think. So basically, it's the idea that that Canada is a very big and diverse country, and our political differences are a product of region. So the best example of that kind of theory is if you look at the prairie provinces, right? Like, if you ever look at an electoral map of Canada, you'll see that there's this giant blue section in the middle with Alberta and Saskatchewan that consistently votes Conservative. And then you think, okay, well, Alberta and Saskatchewan are two economies that are heavily reliant on oil and gas, and the Conservative Party has traditionally been more kind to oil and gas companies. So the logical kind of deduction there is, okay, provinces that are pro-oil and gas because of the land end up being more conservative because of that. Now, the issue with regionalism is that it's a really complicated theory and it's tough to prove. So by example, one way of thinking of it is it's just like, okay, if someone just magically comes to Alberta, like, so they're living in BC and then they don't support oil and gas, they're not conservative, and then they magically move to Alberta, and then just by being on the land, they're conservative? Or is it the people themselves that are on the land that makes them more conservative or makes them pro oil and gas? So I think it's a really complicated issue that's tough to prove in a sense. But the theory makes sense, but it's very difficult to prove, is what I would say.
Yeah, so just on that thought, Gaby, how do we sort of, as young people who maybe have different backgrounds, how do we combat those biases? Maybe if you're, for example, a student at Queen's or student at Waterloo who comes from Alberta or comes from one of these provinces, how do you sort of combat that regional bias or that lack of knowledge? How do you address it?
Yeah, I can definitely say from experience that it is easy to ignore, right? And just say, oh, out of sight, out of mind, like, this does not impact me, so I don't need to care about it. But the important thing is that our resources do impact like every single one of us as a country. So I think the first part is sort of realizing that it does have an impact on you. It impacts you as a student as well as like your future career. So I think realizing that it does have a personal impact is the most important part, which I didn't realize it did myself until I started working in the industry. So it definitely is hard to overcome as an outsider. And then the second part would be the education. So it's so easy to see misinformation on the internet. So maybe you shouldn't read every single article and believe everything you see, which I know is an obvious thing people say all the time, but just making sure your information is coming from reliable sources. And just being open to the education part too. So make sure you're seeing both sides of the conversation, which is something that I know YCR stresses so much, is we try and get people on both sides so they can work off each other's opinions and build off each other's opinions, because even if someone disagrees with you, you can definitely still learn from them. So yeah, I would say just kind of realizing how much it can impact you, and then working on getting that education piece can sort of help with those regional biases, and yeah, just help gain or expand your knowledge on the industries.
Yeah, and I mean, social media is obviously a big part of it when it comes to different opinions, and obviously natural resources is definitely a hotbed of that. So we actually have obviously Sohaib, who is a resident Twitter user and is probably one of the most knowledgeable when it comes to, you know, how those spaces kind of work on Twitter and that type of social media. So I just wanted to ask you, Sohaib, on that same sort of regionalism aspect, or like the differing opinions on natural resources. As a strong advocate of those natural resource projects online, what is the most common negative misconception that you see, and how do you sort of educate those people on the fence who maybe have sort of joined your side of the story after a while, or how do you sort of bridge that gap?
I think it's taking into account as, okay, looking at the alternative. Okay, well, this is something you're against, all right, what are you for? Okay, now let's talk a little bit about numbers in order to see if that's something that's viable. And if it's something that's viable, then, you know, absolutely we'll embrace that both together. I think that I've found when you entertain the alternative, and once it demonstrates its lack of viability, you start to understand, okay, well, we need the hydrocarbon sector, but what can we do in order to to reduce our impact, the harmful impacts we can, and then we share with the audience as to what Canada's doing. The programs the Alberta Innovates has. We ended up having Brian Hefbaum come and talk about bitumen beyond combustion and the wonderful things that they're trying to do to be able to repurpose our bitumen, to be able to come up with carbon fibers and so forth. And they're going through the test phase and iterating through that concept. And that way you end up having a product and it's not being combusted. And then that way you know that your bitumen is going to be able to build things that will hang around for a lot longer than just being consumed. The other thing as well to taking into note is putting numbers to understand the size in the scope. So Alberta has been in a deficit for the past 7 years. And we've had complaints in terms of trying to get more hospitals, trying to get more services. Right now, we've just been able, so 2021, 2022 budget, we've been able to balance the budget. We ended up with $3.6 billion surplus, the first surplus in 7 years. And for the non-hydrocarbon, non-renewable resource revenue, we ended up coming up 13.3 billion more than budget. This is based on a 77 WTI average price for last year. Right now, we're averaging somewhere up in the 90s. So that's only going to compound further, and we're going to be able to help and assist further Albertans with the resources that they need based on the capital that the sector is generating. And just in order to just highlight another figure, typically in terms of royalties, not corporate tax rates, just royalties, these energy producers have typically paid $3 billion a year. In the past, this year, they're set to pay $21 billion. That's a 600% increase, about roughly 600%. So just the magnitude, the magnitude of their contributions is staggering. And we need to find ways to be able to work with those producers, to be able to get them in a place that we want to do, rather than find ways to fight them and shoot our own foot, so to speak. So that's what I would like to say in regards to that. So the best success that I've personally had is trying to look at the alternatives, and by understanding the alternatives and understanding their limitation, we can better understand and appreciate the current producers that have immense contribution to not only Alberta as a whole, but through Canada. And that's the biggest frustrations that Albertans have had is a country that consumes the province's riches, but in turn does so much to limit production and limit its progress. So that's what it is. That's what I would say in a nutshell, Justus.
Yeah, and very well said. I completely agree that if we're gonna seriously consider leaving hydrocarbons, we have to also seriously consider what is the viability of the alternative, and how well does it work to replace said hydrocarbons and, a fossil fuel economy. So I completely agree. So just continuing on that point of understanding and sort of this new wave of alternatives and how it works and how to really guide that conversation. So Gaby, how has, a new sort of understanding of ESG and those factors changed maybe your perspective on natural resource development through maybe some of your work?
Yeah, so I've been in the industry for like a little over a year, so I can see how it's changed in that past year. For example, we have, when we're doing presentations to our board of directors and our stakeholders, like we always include ESG because we know that it is a priority for our company and it is something that we've always put above other things. So we are always updating them on what are we doing as a company to, in my case, it's tying in gas. So we're flaring and we're venting less and we're doing this, we're making sure it's still economic for the company, but it's obviously good for the environment. So that's something that we've made a priority for the past year. It's like always been a focus of mine and, forever thinking of project ideas. ESG is always on the top of the list. Like, oh, well, have you thought about doing this? And can we do this instead? So yeah, I think this is also something that we've stressed quite a bit at YCR is the fact that global demand for fossil fuel and energy is continuing to grow. And the fact that Canada is able to reduce our overall emissions intensity while also growing production over the last few decades is so huge. Like, I think that is something that's so amazing. So demand's growing, we're reaching that demand, but at the same time, we're also lowering emissions. That is just incredible to me. And I think that's something that should be celebrated a lot more. And that, yeah, just that fact alone is something that has really just like encouraged me again for working in the industry. It just makes me proud. And that's something that we can just continue to build on. Like we've already done amazing things and we can continue to build on those to just continue like upping that bar and encouraging other countries to do the same, because there are not a lot of countries that can say they're increasing their production and serving the world while also reducing their emissions.
Great point. And I also wanted just stressing on the ESG. Obviously, we focus a lot on the E in ESG, but maybe, Myles, you could expand a bit on the S and G, which is social and governance. And why do you think young Canadians should care more or care as much about E as they do about S and G in regards to where energy comes from, human rights, and aspects like that?
Yeah, I mean, all you really have to do is look at a map and look at the top oil and gas producers and look at the countries with the most oil and gas reserves in the world, and then you can compare that to a map of various freedom and human rights index, and you'll see that Canada makes the top of the list, right? Where it's like, okay, do we want to get oil and gas from Canada, or do we want to get it from Saudi Arabia? Do we want to get it from Qatar? In countries that have had multiple human rights violations, where it's like, we want to get it from Canada, and it's easy to think about, or it's easy to not think about, where you fill up your car and gas from Alberta and gas from Saudi Arabia ultimately looks the same to most people, but it's like it doesn't come from the same place. It comes from places with vastly different standards for human rights.
Yeah, and just to expand on that, Sohaib, why do you think that more people are looking towards the S and G instead of just looking at the E, like has been happening over the past few years? Why do you think companies are really trying to push, or at least people are trying to push, the social and governance factors? And why do you think it's important for young Canadians to actually value those just as much as they value the environmental factors?
Because when you do that, you prioritize people, which is a crucial, I think, misunderstanding when objects get prioritized more than humans. And that's why I think that prioritizing humans is a great way of going about it. And being able to control, so when you are producing your resource, you're able to control how it's produced. When you are importing it from someone else, a lot of the renewables are imported from China. We cannot control how items are produced in that country. We import a lot of our oil in Canada from Nigeria. We do not control We don't have any restrictions how much oil is leaking into the ground, broken pipelines, and so forth. How much there, but when it's produced in Canada, we have the ability to be able to control the production, the quality of the production, the effect it has on the environment, and control the impact it has on people, right? So in a lot of places where there's not admin safety training, and so that like it's working in the sector, in the field, is a very hazardous job, and you want to ensure that you have really high safety standards. And our companies are very proud of their safety standards, whereas in other parts of the world where humans might be a little more replaceable, there might not be that much of an emphasis. So it's similar to the effect that we had with diamonds, where like, okay, we don't want blood diamonds, or okay, so now it could be a similar effect with oil. I don't want to get my oil from a company that has a extremely high safety incidence. So this is why I think prioritizing the S&G means prioritizing the human element is important, because that way we can better take all the different types of lettering into account.
Yeah, a fantastic point. And I think it's also really important when it comes to maybe catching people on the fence who are undecided about whether we should be expanding production in Canada or should be, prioritizing our own natural resources. So Gaby, can you just expand a bit on maybe like why you think that's such an effective message for someone who's maybe in Eastern Canada or not within the Western provinces, or someone like you who works in the industry?
Sorry, could you explain what message in particular, just so I don't go off on like a huge tangent?
Yeah, so the social and governance factors, I guess, is the main thing. Why do you think it's effective in order to sort of not convince people, but for people to see the perspective that we do need Canadian energy, and we do need Canadian resources?
Awesome. Yeah, thanks for clarifying. I'll kind of build on Sohaib's comment there. For example, like people working in the field. I spent one day in the field in early February. It was -40 out, and I have just never been more grateful in my life for these hundreds and thousands of Canadian workers, Canadian born, that we're employing to work in these fields to help us stay warm while we're at home. It is such a crazy concept that these people can sustain like that lifestyle, and they love doing their job and they're amazing at it, just so we can all live comfortably and have our lights on and have heat on, and we can boil our water and cook our eggs with like not a single thought in the world. So I think that association is really a gray area, because like I said, I knew nothing about that, and the fact that I knew nothing just is almost worse than having like a negative effect on it, because I had no reasons to be proud of the industry and respect the people that work in the industry. So there was definitely that, just like I said, out of sight, out of mind. It's not my problem, so I don't care about it. Yeah, just knowing and like having the trust that the Canadian companies are doing everything that they can to make sure that their workers are in good hands and that they have their rights and that they're not being overworked and they're not, working, I don't even know how many, like how nonstop they work, but yeah, to make sure that they're not overworked and they're doing a good job is so incredibly important in the industry. And it's a lot of things that it's something that people don't know. So just making sure that we're celebrating that and that we're showing these working lifestyles to the rest of Canada, I think will help people appreciate that side of things a bit more. Because I know I appreciate it, like from the bottom of my heart. I will, I never want to go back there in -40 weather, and people do it every year, every day, and without a complaint.
100%. And I agree with the out of sight, out of mind point. And I think each of you kind of brought it up in your own way. I think it's important for us as Canadians to be vocal about, where our energy comes from, where, we're getting our energy, why it's important. Because once people start realizing that, and once you start talking to people about that, it begins to change minds. And it's very clear to see that it has changed minds. And I think it's important, like Sohaib said, for the people aspect, and as well as the environmental aspect, for people to know why it's important, where oil and gas, where our mining materials, our rare minerals come from to make these electric cars, to make all these new innovations. It has to come from somewhere, and it should come from Canada. So I'm just going to go through one last question here. And this is for everybody, so we can sort of go around the horn and each can answer, but we'll start with Myles. So what is your most important reason for young Canadians to be engaged and literate on these natural resource issues?
So I think that Canada is a resource superpower. We have abundance of natural resources, and what that means is that we as Canadians need to decide what to do with them. So it goes to the old saying, heavy is the head that wears the crown. And I think as members of Canadian society, we all share some of that burden of leadership. So we have a responsibility as Canadians to have that discussion and do so in an informed way. And, hopefully what we want to do is we want to build a more sustainable world where we're not ravaging the environment and not working people to death, which is why we do things like ESG. But we also want to live in a world where we can prosper, which is why we actually need resources. So we need to have that balanced conversation, and we need to do it in an informed manner. And that balance, it's tough. It's not easy. And I think that resource literacy is the way to go because it gives us the best tools to have that informed conversation.
Awesome. Well, we'll go to Sohaib next. What's your most important reason for young Canadians to be informed about natural resources, about these issues?
Well, I would say for anybody that's interested about their economic prosperity, about their quality of life, it's very important to keep an eye on these issues, so you don't end up in where there's an overconcentration. So in Canada, we are a resource-rich nation, but what we've done is we've kind of focused and allowed our economy to depend on real estate over the resource aspect, and as a result of that, what ends up happening is whenever there's shifts in interest rates or whatever it may be, you end up finding that there is a huge impact now, and it's not being as sustainable because you're not being absolutely as diversified as you can possibly be. So this is very important to be able to build multiple different types of your economic platform to ensure that you're not over leveraged or over dependent on one thing. And Eastern Canada is over dependent on the real estate aspect. And that we're going to see that, and it's going to, the discourse about it is going to increase as the effect of these higher interest rates to curb inflation. And largely the inflation, ironically, has been driven by higher energy prices. So the irony there, in terms of the inverse relationship those two are having, is going to affect all of us. And that's why it's very important to be able to hold these aspects top of mind to ensure our prosperity and quality of life in this country.
Very well said. Gaby, what is your most important reason for young Canadians to be engaged to talk about resources, these issues?
I think the most important reason that we should become engaged is because it's just another thing that can bring us all together as a country to work together and help improve what we've already done so great at. So, we all come together when the Canadian hockey team makes the Olympics, when we're fighting for that gold medal. And that's pretty much what we're doing with our resources right now. So it's just another thing that we can use it as a way to bring Canadians together. And once we can all sort of agree that we need them and we're doing a great job of producing them, let's all come together and then just build it up and continue improving something that we're already doing so well. So, our standards are already at that gold medal level. So why aren't we all standing together and being proud of that and watching it continue to grow? And I think sort of once we can all get to that agreement, that's when Canada will truly prosper as a country. And we're ready for that to happen. Let's make it happen.
Awesome. Great ending. Couldn't have said it better myself. So that's the last of the questions I have. I do really appreciate each of you coming in and giving your voice to this conversation. I think it's really amazing. Sohaib, you had one more thing you wanted to add?
I guess the last thing I want to say is, the energy markets are really predicated on the supply and demand, and then the pricing is the benchmark pricing is predominantly based on the perception of that supply and demand dynamic. So for the past, 6-7 years, even more recently, 2017, 2018, 2019, there's been a global movement in restricting capital towards energy. And typically what you end up having in any environment, if you end up restricting capital towards a supply aspect, you got to do something with the demand aspect. The demand aspect has got to be able to decrease. But if you end up in a situation where the demand is constantly rising and you're restricting supply, you're going to run into a situation where the pricing mismatch between them is going to increase. And the wider that it increases, the more the price of energy is going to increase. And the higher the price of energy is going to increase, everything collectively is going to increase. So we're starting to see that happen. And if we don't work towards funding the sector a bit more in order to increase the supply, we're going to have the current cost of energy continuously rise, and it's going to impoverish a lot of people, especially the people on the edges. And if we really care about our fellow human beings and we really care about humanity, we really need to understand the impact we're having by having this effect on restricting supply and the impact it will have globally, especially the third world countries that are going to be severely impacted. We saw the riots that have taken place in Bangladesh as a result of high energy costs. There were issues in Morocco, in other places as well. Lebanon is another example of a country that is having huge issues. But this is sort of the other thing that we need to add into the factor by being able, rather than being blind and just saying, okay, we just gotta throw it out. We gotta look into the effects that would have. So that's ultimately what I wanted to share as a closing note, is just keep the supply and demand balance at the top of mind. And if it's something you want to move away from, then you better have a solid understanding that demand would decrease in order to curb that balance, or we're all going to be affected globally at different proportions relative to everyone's individual economic well-being. So that's just the last little bit I wanted to just sneak in there, and I'll pass it back to you, Justus.
Yeah, awesome, Sohaib. I couldn't have said it better myself. And it's something that we don't really think about as young Canadians, that what we do and how much energy really has an impact on everything we do. Like Sohaib said, the cost of energy affects the cost of everything, whether it's agriculture, whether it's the heating in your home, whether it's the cost to manufacture products, which is actually an even bigger impact, because that leads into basically everything we do. If it's a higher cost to mold something, a higher cost to weld something, it affects everything that gets built, every piece of infrastructure, every hospital, everything. So it's really essential that and I think that's what we've tried to outline in this sort of panel, is that it's essential for us to sort of have that conversation, be literate about energy, about natural resources. And I think each of you has done a fantastic job today. I couldn't have outlined those points any better myself. I'm glad we had such a diverse panel with a lot of different experiences and different opinions on how to get there. But it's clear that we need to have a better understanding of natural resources in Canada, and that's what YCR is here for. So on that note, thanks again to all our panelists. Thanks for everybody who listened in. And we hope to do another panel like this again, because I think it was awesome to hear from each one of you. Thank you, Sohaib. Thank you, Gaby. Thank you, Myles. And I think we'll wrap it up. So once again, from YCR, follow our social media at YC Resources. We recently rebranded, so make sure you go there and follow and be up to date on the latest information about Canada's natural resources. So once again, thank you for joining, and goodbye.